Okay. Whenever you're
Okay,
ready.
cool. Well, what I had in mind for this adult formation class was to mainly um, get a sense of what eco-justice, environmental justice, climate justice means, and then especially from a faith perspective, you know, as Christians, what are different ways we can frame those issues, and then once we kind of get that framework, we'll then talk about some specific issues on the citywide level, the state level, and then national and kind of international stage. And then the advocacy portion of this will be around how do we connect with our the people at every level, you know, of those issues, to make our voice heard. And I feel like, especially as you know, people of faith, that that specific perspective is important, you know, to our decision makers. And what are some ways we can frame our perspective on these issues. So I guess I will start here. So you know, this is leading up to St. Francis Sunday on October 4th. So I thought I would just begin with a little bit of this, which is Pope Francis's encyclical on climate change and inequality, Laudato Si. And just wanted to read a little bit of this, which is basically talking about global inequality. So he says, in fact, the deterioration of the environment and of society affects the most vulnerable people on the planet. Both everyday experience and scientific research show that the gravest effects of all attacks on the environment are suffered by the poorest. For example, the depletion of fishing reserves especially hurts small fishing communities without the means to replace those resources. Water pollution particularly affects the poor who cannot buy bottled water. Rises in the sea level mainly affect impoverished coastal populations who have nowhere else to go. And then this is from the, let's see. I should be screen sharing. Is everyone able to see everything?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So this is from 2019. The Episcopal Public Policy Network had this series of, I think they're different like advocacy issues that they focused on. But I just wanted to highlight this, you know, what Presiding Bishop Curry talks about when walking, you know, the idea of walking in the way of love, Jesus's call in the new commandment to love our neighbors as ourselves, you know, basically tying the fight against injustice to, you know, extending that to environmental issues. One form of injustice is environmental racism. It says the cumulative and disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. This is exhibited in policies and plans surrounding land use, energy production, waste management, and many other ways that lead to certain communities bearing the brunt of negative environmental impacts, such as higher levels of pollution and environmental degradation. And then this is from the NAACP. They have it seems like environmental and climate justice is something that they're especially highlighting. And when we think about issues like lead, you know, lead poisoning in certain communities, which communities are more likely to live near highways or landfills or toxic waste dumps, you know, it's more likely going to be communities of color, communities that are already somewhat marginalized. Like in Southern Ohio, this past year, they talked about this, I think it was like a uranium enrichment or plutonium enrichment facility, and they had to close the middle school because outside of the middle school, it was testing, the radiation levels were too high, basically. And so they had to close this middle school. And this is in Appalachia, Southern Ohio, which already has a long history of kind of exposure to these issues. So that's kind of the framing that I wanted to begin this with, because going back to this NAACP page, I really appreciate what they say here. In the past, and to some extent still now, when people think of environmentalism, they often think of saving the whales or hugging trees. When folks think about climate change, what often comes to mind are melting ice caps and suffering polar bears. Historically, American society has failed to make the connection in terms of the direct impact of environmental injustices, including climate change, on our own lives, families, and communities. So, just this idea that environmental issues, climate change, it's not something far away. It's here, it's in our communities, it's in our cities, neighborhoods, and we have to kind of think of it in this justice framework, and I think that's pretty appropriate in terms of, an extension of St. Francis's work of both centering the poor in a lot of these discussions, but also thinking about the environment and I think the term is anthropocentric world. We are in a human-centered world, and what are ways that we can kind of step away from that? So the first kind of more local issue I wanted to highlight was, and the more I've learned about this, the more I've just become fascinated with it, is the idea of the urban heat island effect, which basically means that certain parts of the city, based on just what sort of materials, is it asphalt or concrete, or is there tree cover? Basically, that is connected with the heat, the literal temperature in that part of the city, and that is often connected to income. Lower income areas have less tree cover is the core of this. So NPR did this investigation. This is from last year. And it basically looked at different cities and looked at how they compared, what parts of the city were had a higher average temperatures. And so we can go to Ohio. Let's see, Columbus. And, just get to, it's not a perfect correlation necessarily, but it kind of gets us thinking about city planning, zoning, these very local issues about how decisions are made about our city, and which communities feel the brunt of that impact. And the other side of this is Columbus is actually aware of this, and they are taking efforts to basically remedy this through what's called the Columbus Urban Forestry Master Plan. And so they're starting to be more intentional about this conversation. And so we see, even in the Columbus context, downtown, obviously. Let's see if this loads. Great. Can everyone see this map?
Yes.
Great. So in the Columbus context, we see, downtown, obviously, that, anyone who's been in downtown Columbus knows there's not a lot of trees. So, you see what's the percentage, 71 hard surface, that's your asphalt and concrete, water features, tree canopy, open green space. And then over here in Franklinton, a little bit different. Whereas if we go to, other neighborhoods, Clintonville, that's much higher. Further out, Westland area, much lower. So, And there's a lot of things that are tied up into this. The idea of redlining, which communities historically were able to get financing to buy, to get mortgages and get loans to buy houses, and the history of racism there. So that was the first issue I wanted to highlight. And of course, if anyone has anything to say, please jump in. So it's fortunate that Columbus is aware of this issue. I think that this is still an effort that is somewhat behind some of their original goals. I think they were trying to plant, tens or hundreds of thousands of trees by 2020, and they unfortunately have fallen short of that goal. But at least it's something that is on the city's docket. So that's kind of the local level, the neighborhood by neighborhood level. Another kind of environmental justice issue on the statewide, let's see, level is, shoot, okay. Bear with me here. Is House Bill 6. And this was a bill that passed last July and it has come into effect recently. It basically, it does a lot of things, but the main thing is that it subsidizes 2 nuclear power plants in Ottawa County, in Oak Harbor, and in Perry and Lake County. Subsidizes these 2 nuclear power plants, as well as, I believe, a couple of coal-fired power plants out of state via everyone's electric bills. So they added additional, they're called riders, to everyone's electric bills, so that for every charge that you get on your monthly bill, a little bit goes to these. And they did that while also eliminating riders that applied to energy efficiency and other kind of sustainable renewable energy stuff, and then while also eliminating the state's renewable energy portfolio goals, which I think had been 12% was the goal by, I'm not sure, 2025 or 2030. Greg, do you have any other thoughts on this, or more of the specifics in terms of the renewable energy goals?
Yeah, I think it was 12%, and then the energy efficiency component was 22% of our power essentially coming from that.
Mm-hmm.
And when they said it was supposed to be a wash in cost, the energy efficiency riders going away and the nuclear and coal bailout riders coming in, what they didn't account for was that the energy efficiency riders created rebates. So actually, for every dollar of rebate, there was 2.5 times that spent, because people had rebates and then they were spending the rest of the money.
So this is kind of this is the fiscal analysis. This is on the legislature website. Let's see if I can. Yeah. Legislature.ohio.gov. There's a very easy search tab, search legislation, and fortunately this is a very easy number to remember. And this is just the fiscal note, which these are all estimates basically prepared by the Legislative Service Commission, but just to get a sense of, these were the estimates in terms of the funds for revenue generated by this. We're looking at approximately 50 million customer bills, annual revenue. So, but this bill also had a few other components to it. One was these solar projects that were approved as part of this. So part of the compromise of passing this bill was allowing some of these other utility grade solar projects to go through the power siting board, and there was also changes to the HEAP program. So in terms of environmental justice, we see that, well, to take a step back, recently the Speaker of the House was indicted on federal racketeering charges related to this. So there was a lot of bad public, servant activity, I guess, that happened behind the scenes to make this happen. So it's definitely been deemed problematic by a lot of state level lawmakers. I guess from an environmental justice point of view, especially eliminating the state's renewable energy portfolio was kind of a step backwards if we think about ways that our state was actively trying to promote both energy efficiency by in households, as well as promoting more renewable energy. So to kind of take another step, this is an issue that the city of Columbus is looking at. This is community choice aggregation, which the city is putting up to a vote for city residents this fall. But it basically allows the city to aggregate the electricity demand of residents in order to basically use that collective buying power to get better rates and to make sure that those rates are being spent on renewable energy sources. So the city is collectively choosing to buy just renewable energy. If this passes, I think people will be able to opt out, but everyone will automatically be able to. Everyone will be opted in, but they can choose to opt out. So this is another kind of public utilities, renewable energy issue that, when we, separate from the kind of environmental racism, environmental, immediate effects of city planning and design, renewable energy is obviously a way where we can reduce our carbon footprint, slow climate change. And so this is, another positive effort that the city is making in that regard.
And Eli, the selected contractor will build a very large 700 megawatt solar system in central Ohio to provide that energy. So that's jobs plus it's local. So
it's great.
And actually, for wherever it goes, property taxes for that county and that community.
That's great. Does that have to go through the power siting board? Do you know?
Yeah, well, it will have to go through the power siting board when it happens. So it'll go through its normal regulatory steps. They committed, I think, to get it built within 2 years. But frankly, there's probably 7 or 8 projects looking for someone to be off takers, they call them, of the power that are in the planning stages just in central Ohio. So I think the power siting board will allow it to happen.
That's great. I know that there's the other, this is a lot of conversation about solar, but the other part of it is wind, right? And I know that there's been some controversy about establishing wind turbines up in Lake Erie, kind of offshore wind turbines that recently cleared the power siting board. So that's another positive step.
Yeah, the power siting board made a decision about they had to shut off at night through half the year, and against the recommendation of their staff with no background or in data. And there was such an outcry that they just reversed their decision this week on that.
Yeah. So that's, you know, it makes business sense. It's good for the environment. It's a good solution. I know that they were concerned about migratory birds and bats, but they had already done a study confirming that that wouldn't be an issue for bats or migratory birds. So they kind of tacked that on anyway.
But I think it's a good example of where advocacy works. People screamed, and at all levels, and they actually reversed themselves and said, "Oh, never mind." I mean, they didn't even have a good excuse as to why they reversed themselves, because they didn't have a good excuse for why they made the ruling in the first place.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's an example of when we speak up, things can change.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Can I jump in for a second? I'm in the office with.
Can you guys hear? Can you guys hear Dick? He's speaking.
In the office with Kathy and Craig from a distance, and I just want to let you know I clicked on several times the connection on the email, and it says that cannot be reached. So I don't know if it's just me or if it's a structural problem.
Okay.
But that may explain
Why there's only 2 folks here.
Yeah, I ran into that problem, so I just went to an older e-chimes and pressed the dial dead, but yeah, it does not work.
Uh-oh. Okay.
We'll learn from it.
Yeah.
That's okay. This is a very rich conversation. If you don't mind my hovering in the corner, I found it fascinating.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and we're recording it, Dick, so we'll be able to repost it.
and I'm just keeping an eye out for 2 different doors where our guests
Okay.
are coming.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think that's a really good point, Craig. And a lot of these people are not, you know, they're not some distant, you know, entities somewhere in the ether. They're real people that are accessible, and you know, public officials are, you know, accountable to us, and they work for us. So we can definitely be in conversation with them. So the next issue I wanted to just, you know, focus on is, you know, this idea of national and international kind of power and justice between different countries. You know, this is kind of, you know, in a way, there's a lot more nuance than this, but I think it's these maps are a very good conversation starter. And I personally am a very visual person, and maps are very instructive for me. So I just wanted to share this. This is obviously, you know, the map we're more familiar with. And then these maps are, you know, the amount, basically every country's amount of poverty and then amount of carbon emissions. So we can see this story that kind of is pretty intuitive, that obviously North America, you know, Europe, you know, there's less poverty globally than, you know, in other countries in the global South. Whereas in the second picture, we see that, you know, North America, Europe, other countries have a disproportionately large amount of carbon emission. And then some countries, interestingly, it is kind of equivalent, you know, maybe in South America, their amount of carbon emissions are, you know, proportional to the levels of poverty. But the sense that on the national and international stage, there are these dynamics, and it's important to think about our neighborhoods, our cities, states, but there's also these other considerations, especially when we think of climate change being a global problem. You know, we can do everything in the world to make Columbus, Ohio, the perfect, most environmentally just and progressive place. But at the end of the day, what's happening, you know, outside of the city, outside of Ohio, outside of the United States, also implicates us, and you know, we're not separate from it. So, does anyone have any thoughts or impressions, you know, from looking at these maps?
Yeah, I mean, the maps are a really great representation of this. And one of the things I just keep thinking about is climate migrants and how, as we move forward with climate change, there's going to be people from the global south or wherever we're seeing this right now with migration. And I just think about kind of the way things are right now with nationalism on the rise and how this is going to be something that we're going to deal with more and more in the future. And maybe humans aren't that great at foresight, but something we need to anticipate is the fact that there's going to be more people, more and more migrating as a result of climate change, and somehow overcoming these nationalistic feelings. And if we claim to be Christians, then seeing these people as our neighbors and trying to find ways to accommodate and realizing that they've contributed the least amount to climate change. And maybe it's part of our duty to find solutions because we've contributed so much. But yeah, look at the map kind of drives that home for me. So that's what I wanted to say.
And to some extent, we're already experiencing that, right? With the fires in California. I mean, I don't know if everyone saw those images of San Francisco and Oregon where the light was like orange or red, just glowing. It was otherworldly. I mean, it was like outside of a movie. But these were major cities. These weren't, isolated, forest fires. This was a widespread thing. And between that and, hurricanes along the Gulf Coast and people having to pick up, and this is just within our own country. This doesn't take into account, people in other continents and, having to move and pick up everything. And, communities are going to have to think about how they can be more resilient to climate change, both in terms of their infrastructure and the way they get food and the way they make energy, but also the way that they're going to have to interact with their neighbors, and exactly what Robbie said, these are our neighbors, these are our brothers and sisters throughout the world, and we have to do what we can to see the dignity and humanity in them and act accordingly. So those were kind of the issues I wanted to highlight. And then just kind of to end with, I wanted to basically introduce everyone, if you're not already aware, to different ways that we can connect with kind of government decision makers at every level, starting from from the neighborhood on up. So in Columbus, I'm not sure if everyone here lives in the city of Columbus, but there's likely equivalents, in surrounding cities. But these are the area commissions, which basically work with City Hall on more local issues, but also makes some zoning decisions. So if we go back to the earlier page on tree cover and how different neighborhoods are affected more by landfills and factories and highways and basically canopy cover, these are the individuals who represent those various communities to city council and influence zoning decisions. So we can look at, here's, just pick one at random. So, North Linden Area Commission, for example, these meetings are public, resident, if you're a resident of any of these, you can participate, you can reach out to these people, it's all public information, and they're wanting to hear from you on all these issues. So if you are concerned about tree cover or just want to know what's going on, maybe there is going to be a new development in your neighborhood, and you want to kind of see what people are thinking, this is a really great way to get involved there. The next level is city government. Columbus doesn't have a ward system, so all of the city council members are at large, and so they all work for you. They all are accountable to you. And so if you have a strong, something that you want to say, this is their contact information, obviously in the, this is a conversation about environmental issues, by and large. And so Councilmember Emmanuel Remy, he's the chair of the Environment Committee. So his office, they are the point people for environmental issues. Obviously, also Rob Dorns is the chair of the Public Utilities Committee. So when we go back to community choice aggregation, that issue that's up on the ballot this November, any questions about that? Rob Dorns, Council Member Elizabeth Brown on recreation and parks. That's also, to some extent, an environmental issue. And, these are their legislative staff and their phone numbers, and they can be contacted. And, if you have any issue, you can reach out to them. This is the state level. These maps are crazy and, are just very odd shapes, and that is somewhat by design, but, we can see our state legislators here on the left as the Ohio House of Representatives members maps. So I am over here in this part of town, and so, Adam Miller, he's my state representative, and this is how to get a hold of their office. There's a way to email. You can call. A person will often be able to pick up on the other end. Similarly, state senate. Let's see. Tina Maharoff. All of her information's there. She can be contacted. So these people are, obviously the further we go up in terms of government, they're less accessible to some degree because they represent more and more people. But, you will be heard if you contact these people. And then next level is, Congress in Washington, D.C. It can be found there, by zip code, and then here's U.S. Senate. Sherrod Brown, Rob Portman. So with that, I wanted to, let's see. Just turn it into more of a conversation at this point about how we can, leverage or come up with a way to kind of voice this perspective and connect with those people. And I also wanted to hear if anyone has had positive experiences with this, or any thoughts here.
I think one other area, I'm told that letters to the editor matter as well, that our elected officials read those or have them, so if they see if the senator sees across the state, there's letters about a given topic with, let's say, the Paris Climate Agreement or something, then they pay attention to that. Yeah, so I think I've been to various lobbying days, and you have a lot of experience as a legislator too, Eli, that they don't always, they may not agree with you, but they always will listen. They're aid. I mean, a lot of times you're going to talk to a legislative aide, but I even remember going to, went to Washington and was in Boehner's office when he was the head of the House of Representatives, and it was a very nice meeting. Now, we didn't necessarily make any ground, but our legislators will listen to us if we go speak to them.
Yeah, and they are, and especially if they start hearing the same thing over and over again, you know, it becomes something that they can't ignore necessarily. Whether or not, you know, on the day of the vote, they're going to, you know, agree with you or not, you know, is a separate thing, but just kind of going forward, they'll know that it's something to, you know, that they have to keep an eye on at least. But
I've had a much less positive response to, but more on a national level, I suppose, with Rob Portman's office. Sometimes not even be able to get into the building. You know, their refusal to let people even in the building where his office is inability to get anyone to answer the phone, those kind of things. So, you know, I mean, I think it's important to keep trying and to keep, you know, sending emails or whatever is your option. But my experience on, again, it's not local though, but you know, when you get on the national level, at least where I work, is just on Broad Street, and just walking down to his office on occasion to, you know, lodge some sort of a comment. It was really disturbing to find out that, you know, they could even just block you from coming inside the building. I mean, there's a lot of things in that building, not just his office. So not quite as rosy a picture, I guess, for me.
yeah, I mean, that's just part of the reality of this, and you know, just emphasizes the importance of other means of, you know, enacting change. And if 20 people, 50 people are outside of his office wanting to speak, you know, with someone and the doors are locked, that, I mean, that's a pretty, you know, strong image, right? And so I think, you know, making sure people are aware of that is you know, very important. But I also, you know, find the most hope, I think, in more local, you know, city or neighborhood level policy change, because I feel like there's so much more agency that we can have. And so I feel like I've had more positive experiences there. You know, one issue, you know, I'm on the west side of Columbus. One of the big issues is they haven't changed out our dumpsters. So a lot of parts of the city have 90-gallon trash receptacles that you know, there's one for each house. And so on garbage day, you just, you know, wheel it out to the alley and they pick it up, just like you would with your recycling. But in our neighborhood, they have 300-gallon trash, you know, receptacles, dumpsters, and, you know, it just encourages illegal dumping, which ends up in the alleys strewn everywhere. And sometimes the lids are broken off of the dumpsters, and so, you know, it rains, or, you know, it's just, it can be a mess. And so, you know, I feel like those are kind of the issues, you know, and that's in essence an environmental issue. You know, those are the sorts of things that I feel like I can make more headway on an individual level than things that are happening in Washington, D.C. So that's kind of, you know, in terms of personal feeling, I feel like that is something I can make more progress on.
I wanted to say I appreciate the local information and contact information and options that you gave us, because, for instance, you were talking about money and plans to plant trees. So I want to look into that and find out, where are they being planted? Because there are lots of options for money to be spent by put in places that don't really need them necessarily, but might be more aware and might be requiring or requesting this. And the people, for instance, in Franklinton may not even be aware of this, may not even know to push for consideration. So I appreciate that. I have options now. I have places I can go and dig into it a little bit further locally. So I appreciate.
I just
Oh,
have
yeah.
a question real quick. I've called, emailed, and even once written a letter to Steve Stivers. Do you think is there a method of communication that's more effective than another? I don't know, any way to make the bigger impact?
I don't know. I've gotten emails back from Steve Stivers.
I've gotten emails back. They never really
They're the
addressed
kid.
exactly what I was asking, but
I hear you. Yeah, it's very difficult, Steve Stivers. I'm writing postcards for his opponent.
I think phone call, works best if, it's very random if you're able to get through. But I find it's, especially if you're more wanting to ask a specific, question or make a request, like will, person X do Y? Is the person willing to make a statement? Is the person willing to do this? And then just leave it up to their office to answer that. I find that's more positive than just, launching into a, I think, sharing your own thing. There has to be both a, where you're coming from, your perspective, and then also the ask. So but especially phone call, if someone's on the other end and they pick up, and that human connection is just, it's pretty substantial, I think, and hard to ignore.
I'm going to bring us to an end. At least I suppose you guys could keep talking, but church is at 10. So thank you so much, Eli. That was fantastic information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd be glad to share any of those pages or resources if anyone needs them.
Yeah, maybe we could make a list, and then if you could send me a bunch of links, then we could post them. And then we're going to, Robbie, I'll work with you on getting a link to the recording and figuring out how to get that posted as well.
Yeah, that, I would appreciate links. I tried to write down in my journal all these things, but I miss a lot. So links would be great, a list of that.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. Great.
All
right.
Great.
Well,
Take
Thank
care.
you.
take care.
Thank you so
thanks.
much.
Bye.
Bye.
Nice to meet
Bye.
you.